She walked away at the peak of fame, and Hollywood never saw it coming. What would you do if you reached the very top of your profession? When the money was flowing, the admiration was endless, and the future seemed guaranteed. Would you hold on tighter, or would you walk away? At 67, Madeleine Stowe has finally spoken openly about the decision that stunned Hollywood and confused fans for decades. At the height of her success, when she was one of the most admired actresses of the 1990s, she quietly stepped back. Not because she failed. Not because roles dried up. But because she chose something Hollywood rarely rewards: peace, family, and a life that felt real. For years, audiences wondered why she vanished from leading roles just as her star burned brightest. The truth, it turns out, had nothing to do with scandal or decline, and everything to do with clarity. So why would someone walk away from everything they worked for? And what does her choice reveal about fame, fulfillment, and the hidden costs of success? Let's begin at the start. Before Hollywood, there was music. Madeleine Stowe was born in Los Angeles, but her upbringing carried layers of contrast. Her mother's family traced political roots to Costa Rica, including a distant relative who once served as president. Her father, with Dutch, German, and English ancestry, came from a far more grounded American background, raised in Oregon. She grew up in Eagle Rock, a working-class neighborhood of Los Angeles, far removed from red carpets or studio gates. The houses were modest, the streets lined with old trees and cracked sidewalks, the evenings filled with the hum of lawn sprinklers and distant traffic. It was not the Hollywood most people imagine. It was quiet, ordinary, real. And as a child, acting wasn't even on her radar. Music was. At just 10 years old, Stowe committed herself to becoming a concert pianist. She practiced for hours every day, her fingers gliding over the keys with discipline that felt far beyond her years. While other children played outside, she sat upright on a piano bench, repeating scales until they were flawless, chasing perfection in a way only the young can. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was her identity. It was structure. It was ambition. It was a promise of a future shaped by talent and control. Then, in 1976, everything changed. Her piano instructor, her mentor, her guide, passed away suddenly. The loss devastated her. The piano, once a sanctuary, became a reminder of absence. The music felt hollow. And rather than replacing the teacher or continuing on autopilot, she did something unexpected. She stopped playing altogether. Have you ever lost something so central to who you were that you didn't know how to move forward? Have you ever stood at a crossroads, unsure whether to fight for the old version of yourself, or allow something new to take shape? That grief quietly redirected her life. She enrolled at the University of Southern California, studying cinema and journalism, not with a grand plan, but with curiosity. The campus felt expansive and uncertain, filled with students chasing dreams she wasn't sure she shared. Acting came slowly, almost accidentally. A class here. A small audition there. A professor who noticed something in her stillness. In 1980, she appeared on Little House on the Prairie, playing a blind painter. It was a small role, but there was something unmistakable in her presence: stillness, intelligence, restraint. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She watched. She listened. She allowed silence to carry weight. More small television parts followed. None made her famous, but they built a foundation. Long days on set. Quiet lessons in patience. The understanding that success, if it came at all, would require endurance. And then, in 1987, everything changed. The film that changed everything. Stakeout didn't just succeed, it exploded. Paired with Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez, Stowe played Maria, the woman unknowingly watched by two rival detectives who both fall for her. What could have been a shallow role became something warmer, sharper, and more human in her hands. The film crossed $100 million at the box office, a massive success at the time. Hollywood took notice. Audiences didn't just see beauty. They saw humor, intelligence, and emotional grounding. She wasn't trying to dominate the screen, she drew people in. There was an ease about her that felt rare. She didn't perform desperation for attention. She existed within the frame. Suddenly, doors opened. Scripts piled up. Interviews multiplied. Photographers called her name. She found herself navigating premieres, stylists, studio executives, and agents who spoke in numbers and percentages. But here's the question worth asking. How often does sudden success come with invisible pressure? How often does admiration quietly transform into expectation? With every new opportunity came a silent demand. Be bigger. Be more marketable. Be unforgettable. A rapid rise, and remarkable range. In Worth Winning, 1989, she played Veronica Briscoe, a disciplined, classically trained pianist opposite Mark Harmon. The role quietly echoed her own abandoned musical dreams, giving the performance an emotional undercurrent that critics noticed. When she sat at the piano on screen, something authentic surfaced, perhaps a fragment of the girl who once practiced for hours in Eagle Rock. That same year, she shifted dramatically with Revenge, starring opposite Kevin Costner. Set in Mexico, the film explored obsession, desire, and moral decay. Under the blazing sun and against stark desert landscapes, Stowe revealed a darker, more complex emotional register. Passion, fear, defiance. She held her ground in a story defined by intensity. By 1990, she stepped into cinematic legacy with The Two Jakes, the sequel to Chinatown. Acting opposite Jack Nicholson, she delivered a restrained performance that fit perfectly into the film's shadowy noir atmosphere. She understood how to occupy space without overwhelming it. Then came Closetland, 1991, a stark, minimalist two-character film opposite Alan Rickman. Gone was glamour. Gone were distractions. The story relied entirely on psychological tension, and she matched Rickman beat for beat. It was a masterclass in emotional endurance. In tight frames and dimly lit rooms, she allowed vulnerability and strength to coexist. That same year, Unlawful Entry became one of the most unsettling thrillers of the early 90s. As a woman whose home and sense of safety slowly unravels, Stowe's quiet vulnerability made the danger feel uncomfortably real. She portrayed fear not as hysteria, but as a slow erosion. But the role that defined her legacy arrived in 1992. The performance that made her timeless. The Last of the Mohicans remains one of the most emotionally enduring films of its era. Directed by Michael Mann, the historical epic demanded restraint, strength, and inner fire. As Cora Munro, Stowe delivered all three. Her chemistry with Daniel Day-Lewis was intense yet controlled, romantic without excess. She conveyed longing through glances, resolve through posture. The final moments of the film, almost wordless, remain among the most powerful endings of 1990s cinema. Against sweeping landscapes and swelling music, her face carried grief, courage, and love in equal measure. At this point, Madeleine Stowe wasn't just successful. She was iconic. Her image appeared on magazine covers. She was named one of the most beautiful women in the world. Directors sought her out. Studios trusted her to anchor major productions. So why didn't she stay? At the peak, doubt crept in. By the mid-1990s, Stowe was everywhere. She starred in Short Cuts, 1993, Robert Altman's ambitious ensemble film that prioritized character over spectacle. In Blink, 1994, she carried a suspense film almost entirely on her own shoulders, portraying a blind woman navigating fragmented perception and memory. The role demanded precision, control, sensory imagination. From the outside, it seemed like a dream trajectory. But internally, something was shifting. The pace was relentless. Weeks blurred into months. Hotel rooms replaced familiarity. Conversations revolved around box office projections and demographic appeal. Scripts arrived faster than she could process them. She had married actor Brian Benben in 1982, and their relationship had endured the unpredictable rhythms of Hollywood. In 1996, they welcomed their daughter, May Theodora. Motherhood altered everything. How do you balance global fame with midnight feedings? How do you memorize lines while longing to memorize your child's expressions? At what point does having it all begin to feel like losing something essential? Stowe began to ask herself questions few in Hollywood pause long enough to consider. What is success if it costs you presence? What is applause if it drowns out your inner voice? She didn't announce a dramatic retirement. She didn't stage a farewell interview. She simply stepped back. She chose to spend more time at her ranch in Texas, away from the constant hum of Los Angeles. Wide skies replaced flashing cameras. Horses replaced headlines. Silence returned, not the silence of lost music, but the silence of choice. Friends say she became more grounded, more at ease. The industry continued without her, as it always does. New stars rose. Trends shifted. The spotlight moved on. But she didn't regret it. A return, on her own terms. Years later, she returned to television with Revenge, 2011 to 2015, playing the commanding and complex Victoria Grayson. The role reintroduced her to a new generation, proving that talent does not expire. This time, she worked differently. Selectively. Intentionally. There was no frantic chase for validation. No need to prove longevity. She had already defined it. And perhaps that's the most radical part of her story. She didn't leave because she couldn't compete. She left because she didn't want to. The bigger question. In a culture obsessed with constant visibility, Madeleine Stowe chose invisibility. In an industry built on reinvention, she chose constancy. In a system that equates worth with output, she chose stillness. What if success isn't about how long you stay in the spotlight, but whether you leave it on your own terms? What if fulfillment isn't measured by awards or earnings, but by quiet mornings and unhurried conversations? Hollywood never saw it coming because Hollywood rarely understands departure without failure. But sometimes walking away isn't surrender. Sometimes it's sovereignty. Perhaps the real question isn't why Madeleine Stowe left at the peak of fame. Perhaps the real question is this. If you reached your highest moment tomorrow, would you have the courage to decide what truly matters next? Critics praised her restraint, never portraying vulnerability as weakness. In China Moon, she embraced classic noir, playing a woman trapped by desire and consequence. Then came 12 Monkeys, 1995, the film many consider her finest work. Opposite Bruce Willis and a wildly unpredictable Brad Pitt, Stowe anchored the film emotionally. As Dr. Catherine Railly, she moved from skepticism to belief with intelligence and empathy. In a chaotic, time-bending story, she was its moral center. At this point, she could have written her own ticket. Magazines celebrated her beauty. She was regularly named among the most beautiful women in the world. And yet, something felt wrong. Have you ever succeeded at something, only to realize it no longer aligns with who you are? The roles began to feel empty. As offers continued, Stowe grew increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of her career. Many roles relied on nudity. Others repeated the same themes: women as victims, women as objects of desire, women defined by fear or helplessness. What once felt like part of the job began to feel personal. She later reflected on how easily women were replaced in the industry, how disposable they were made to feel once they no longer fit a narrow definition. She noticed something else too. Men were allowed contradiction, complexity, moral chaos. Women were not. They were girlfriends, victims, prizes. That realization hollowed out the work. So while her career appeared unstoppable from the outside, internally, she was preparing for something very different. A life built quietly in parallel. Long before fame peaked, Madeleine Stowe had built something far more enduring. In 1982, she married actor Brian Benben after meeting on the set of The Gangster Chronicles. Hollywood marriages are famously fragile, but theirs became one of its quiet exceptions. They avoided spectacle. They avoided publicity. Eventually, they moved to Texas and built a working cattle ranch, not a symbolic retreat, but a demanding, hands-on operation. In 1996, their daughter, May Theodora Benben, was born. Motherhood changed everything. And here came the moment few stars ever face honestly. She chose to step back. No announcement. No farewell tour. She simply stopped chasing. Selective returns, new priorities. After 12 Monkeys, her appearances became intentional rather than automatic. Playing by Heart, 1998, offered a reflective ensemble role. The General's Daughter, 1999, became a major box office hit, earning nearly $150 million worldwide. She could have continued indefinitely. Instead, she continued withdrawing. In We Were Soldiers, 2002, she stepped into a role left by another actress, but by then, acting was no longer central to her identity. Years later, television offered flexibility. Her role on Revenge allowed her to work close to home, on her terms. The contrast was striking. At her peak, she earned millions per film. Later, she chose balance over accumulation. What does that tell us about success? Walking away without regret. For more than a decade, Madeleine Stowe moved effortlessly through Hollywood's inner circle. Then she vanished. No scandal. No bitterness. Just clarity. She recognized the limits of what the industry was willing to give her, and what it was quietly taking away. So she chose peace. She chose presence. She chose a life that didn't require constant validation. Today, she returns only when the role, and the timing, feels right. She doesn't belong to Hollywood anymore. She visits it. And in an industry driven by ego, ambition, and endless hunger, walking away at the height of fame may be the most powerful role she ever played. She didn't leave because the cameras stopped loving her. She left because she started listening to a quieter camera inside herself, the part that measured meaning in long, patient things rather than flashing headlines. Picture a soundstage at dawn, a thin Pacific breeze carrying coffee and the faint tang of diesel. The lights make everyone luminous for a few hours, then the set folds and the illusion is packed away. What does it feel like to watch your face on a magazine and not recognize the person smiling back? What does it feel like to be praised for beauty while the parts of you that actually think and ache and love are edited down to a single caption? People expect exits to be dramatic, manifestos, scandals, public speeches. Stowe's departure was the opposite, a string of small refusals. A role declined because the character was a cardboard echo, a scene refused because it demanded exposure that served only titillation, not story. An award ceremony skipped to sit in her daughter's classroom instead. Those decisions accumulated into a life recalibration. Life on the Texas ranch offered a different tempo. Mornings began before sunrise with a ritual of checking fences and mending what storms had broken. The ranch was not an aesthetic prop, it was a demanding teacher. There were nights listening to the cough of calves and the low, steady breathing of someone asleep nearby. She learned to measure her days in weather and soil and small, honest satisfactions. The repaired gate, the early frost, the sound of rain that meant winter feed would be enough. Her marriage to Brian Benben was not spectacle-driven. It was built on quiet companionship and a mutual refusal to make their life a commodity. There were dinners without photographers, evenings when the world seemed far away and domestic tasks became their own kind of art. In those hours, she was not an image. She was a mother braiding her daughter's hair and a partner arguing about cattle feed. And yet art remained a magnet. When she returned to roles like Dr. Catherine Railly in 12 Monkeys, it was because the role demanded interiority rather than decoration. Railly's transformation, skepticism into compassion, science into vulnerability, offered the moral complexity Stowe sought. When the work allowed contradiction and grit, she rose to meet it. When it reduced a woman to a prop, she said no. Rumors followed, as they always do. Industry insiders whispered that she had become difficult or diminished by age. Those whispers are often a shorthand for the discomfort an industry feels when an asset refuses to be fully owned. But Stowe's choice was not an act of loss but of reallocation. Time and energy moved from publicity to presence. She invested in things fame cannot buy: steady parenting, the deepening of a marriage, the slow returns of cultivated land. Her selective returns changed the terms of her fame. Scarcity gave weight to her appearances. Absence became a presence of its own. When she accepted a role, it was a deliberate conversation with material that respected a woman's interior life. She also used her platform sparingly to uplift projects or voices that mattered, avoiding habitual visibility that dilutes meaning. Isn't there a lesson here about modern life more generally? We often measure success by accumulation. More projects, more followers, more visibility, without asking whether the accumulation aligns with who we want to be. What would change if we treated refusal as a form of wisdom rather than failure? When she returned to television years later, the work felt different, less about careerist momentum and more about collaboration and rhythm. Television allowed for steadier schedules, deeper character arcs, and the ability to be home. That balance is a radical claim in an industry that prizes presence above all. Walking away from the peak of fame was not a retreat so much as a redefinition. In a culture that equates being seen with being known, Stowe taught the opposite. Being present, truly present, can be a form of being seen. She chose the messy, unglamorous tasks of life and, in doing so, reclaimed what had felt hollow in the glare of spotlights. So here's the question worth leaving with. If you had everything the world told you to want, fame, money, accolades, would you have the courage to choose what truly mattered instead? Would you step off the treadmill while people watched, or would you keep running because the applause kept coming? Perhaps that is the most revealing question of all, not only about Madeleine Stowe but about anyone who must decide between spectacle and substance. What would you do with the quiet courage to choose the life you want, to let the applause fade and listen instead to what your days require? Would you answer that call today, right now?